Rich Grove Estates prided itself on being a picture-perfect community until packages began vanishing and whispers replaced smiles. Early June wrapped Savannah, Georgia, in its usual cloak of thick humidity. The air smelled faintly of magnolias and grass clippings, and the sidewalks of Rich Grove shimmered slightly in the heat. On porches lined with potted geraniums, retirees sat with condensation-beaded glasses of sweet tea, nodding to dog walkers and watching the day settle into a slow rhythm. It looked like the American dream preserved in syrup, but Imani Johnson had been watching for the cracks. She sipped her drink slowly from a lawn chair positioned just right to observe foot traffic and delivery vans, her sunglasses hiding eyes trained in more than polite suburban surveillance. The sounds of summer floated through the air, an oscillating sprinkler ticking, a wind chime tapping lazily. But in the space between, Imani noted unease. Neighbors murmured more than they waved lately. Mailboxes were being checked twice, and at the center of the chatter was the HOA meeting scheduled that afternoon. Inside the community hall, the ceiling fans clicked overhead while rows of residents, mostly silver-haired and soft-spoken, unfolded metal chairs and fanned themselves with paper programs. On a long, folding table, pitchers of sweet tea and trays of homemade peach cobbler offered comfort more effective than any policy. Imani sat in the back row, notebook on her lap, phone on silent. She hadn't introduced herself to many people yet, just enough to be considered a polite newcomer. Nothing memorable. Stephanie Holloway stood at the front of the room in a mint green blazer, hair pinned into a tight French twist. Her smile never quite reached her eyes as she adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to reassure everyone, again, that recent delivery mix-ups are being looked into. Our local drivers have confirmed there's been a spike in misaddressed packages. It's unfortunate, but hardly alarming." A few heads nodded, but others didn't. Mr. Thomas Greeley, seated near the window with a rolled newspaper resting on his lap, raised an eyebrow. When Stephanie motioned to move on, he raised his hand. "I do wonder," he said with the easy cadence of someone who had once held that microphone, "why the same homes keep reporting missing items, namely those on Sycamore and Willow Bend. That coincidence has lasted 3 months now." Stephanie's smile froze, then thawed slightly. "We've looked into it, Tom. There's no pattern, and frankly, some of those reports weren't even filed officially." Greeley gave a slow nod. "Convenient." Then he folded his hands. "Still, strange how it's mostly retirees losing their birthday gifts and supplements." Someone near the front coughed. The tension dipped, but didn't disappear. Imani took a discreet photo of the speaker lineup on the meeting program, then leaned forward slightly, scanning the room. Stephanie steered the conversation toward lawn care violations and fence height requirements. Imani's attention, however, was fixed on the nods of compliance and the undercurrent of quiet resentment beneath them. It was the kind of mood that suggested people didn't entirely believe what they were being told, but weren't ready to admit it aloud. Not yet. After the meeting, a slow trickle of residents began drifting outside, refilling tea and gathering into quiet clusters. Imani found herself next to Mr. Greeley near the punch table, both waiting for more ice to be brought in. "You're the new renter on Hawthorne?" he asked without turning. "I am," she said simply. "You taking notes for your memoir, or just curious?" Imani smiled slightly. "Let's say I like to know where I live." Greeley tilted his head toward the door. "Walk with me." They strolled in silence for a minute before he spoke again. "I used to run this HOA, you know, before Stephanie turned every light bulb and dog leash into a citation." "I'd guessed as much," Imani replied. He stopped beside his mailbox, opened it, and pulled out a slim manila envelope. "I've been keeping a list," he said, tapping the envelope lightly. "Dates, names, house numbers, all based on what folks tell me over cobbler and complaint. I think you should see it." She looked at him carefully. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one here watching without blinking," he said, "and I suspect you already know who's at the center of this mess." Imani took the envelope and nodded. "I'll read it." That evening, with the cicadas just starting their summer chorus and the sky tinged coral over the trees, Imani sat at her small desk in the rental house. She opened her laptop and slid Greeley's papers beside it. The screen glowed softly as she began typing each entry into a spreadsheet. There were 27 names, each with an address and a package described as missing: electronics, medication, baby clothes. And they all had one thing in common. Every single one lived within direct line of sight of Stephanie Holloway's porch. That night, Imani quietly opened her laptop and a long list appeared. More than 20 packages missing in 3 months, all near Stephanie's house. The best traps don't snap, they wait, silent and smiling. The morning sun filtered through the lace of oak leaves, painting dappled light across the sidewalks of Rich Grove Estates. The air was gentler than the day before, a temporary mercy from the usual southern humidity. Imani had been awake since before dawn. She stood barefoot in her kitchen, sipping the last of her coffee, watching the street through a narrow slit in the blinds. Outside, the neighborhood was just beginning to stir. A few sprinklers clicked on. A man in a robe shuffled out to get his newspaper. Birds chirped, and the usual rhythm of a peaceful suburb hummed in the background. But on the edge of Imani's porch, placed just right to catch the attention of curious eyes, sat a brown Amazon box. New, sealed, unremarkable. Except it wasn't. Inside the box was a cheap, oversized dog bed, something Stephanie would never order. And tucked carefully inside its folds was a miniature GPS tag synced to an app on Imani's phone. Nestled in one corner was a small wireless camera lens positioned to start recording the moment the box was moved. Everything had been checked twice, every angle tested. The package was addressed to Imani J. at a neighboring house number, just enough off to justify confusion, but not enough to seem deliberate. She opened the tracking app on her phone, confirmed it was live, then set the phone face down and waited. Stephanie usually took her morning walk around the cul-de-sac shortly after 7. Not for exercise, her heeled sandals weren't made for distance, but to observe. She liked to call it checking on the neighborhood. Imani had noted she rarely carried a phone, but always had her HOA-issued clipboard. At 7:32, Imani's camera feed blinked to life. A slim figure in pastel approached the box. Stephanie. She stopped at the edge of the property, tilted her head, scanned the street. Then she stepped up onto the porch, leaned down, and inspected the label. Her eyes lingered, her fingers brushed the top. Still no one around. A slow glance to the left, another to the right. Then, with practiced casualness, she lifted the box and cradled it against her chest. The camera caught the subtle flicker of her smile. Imani didn't move. She barely breathed. Her phone pinged once. Package moved, then went quiet again. The GPS dot began drifting down the sidewalk, moving in real time, curving toward Stephanie's garage. 2 houses over, an elderly woman watering potted begonias paused, watching Stephanie pass with the box. She didn't say a word, just nodded slightly, then returned to her hose. Stephanie didn't acknowledge her. At 7:39, the GPS stopped moving. Coordinates confirmed it was inside Stephanie's home, just past the garage entrance. Imani opened the footage, grainy but clear. Stephanie walked into the garage, set the box on a bench, glanced around again, and exited. Nothing dramatic, just an ordinary theft with the subtlety of someone who had done it before. Imani exhaled slowly. She tapped out a quick note in her case file, time-stamping the sequence. Her laptop screen showed a side-by-side, the label with her name, and the location ping. She added it to the evidence folder. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At 8:06, the garage camera activated again. Stephanie returned, wearing latex gloves and holding a utility knife. She sliced the tape. The flaps opened. Her face twisted in confusion. Dog bed? She leaned closer, searching the inside. Her expression turned sour. Then, without a word, she repacked the contents and shoved the box into another one, larger and already taped on one side. She tucked the repacked item into a far corner just beneath a stack of gardening supplies. The footage captured it all. Every movement, every reaction. Imani saved the clip and uploaded it to a secure cloud folder. She double-checked the GPS, which now read, "Stationary, Garage West Corner." The breadcrumb trail was complete. It was time to start the real report. She sat at the table, opened a fresh document, and began outlining the full chain of events: item creation, delivery route, camera timestamps, GPS pings. It was clean, it was solid, and it would hold up if challenged. She knew the game. Stephanie might scream misunderstanding, claim good intentions, or even play the race card in reverse. Richgrove was that kind of place, but the facts were airtight. As she worked, a delivery truck rolled down the street. A real Amazon driver. Imani watched him park across from Stephanie's house and drop a small box at the front door. Unrelated, but helpful. It gave Stephanie the illusion of randomness, like packages just fell from the sky and anyone could pick one up. By 9 o'clock, the neighborhood was alive. Lawn crews began mowing. A dog barked at a jogger. Stephanie's blinds remained closed. Imani stood and stretched, poured herself another cup of coffee, then glanced at the phone. A fresh notification blinked at the top of the screen. Motion detected. 7:46 a.m., Garage West Corner. She closed her laptop. Time for Phase 2. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing on my porch?" Stephanie's voice sliced through the morning like garden shears. The air that Sunday morning was unusually still. The leaves on the maples stood frozen. The birds quieted just enough that the shout carried across the neatly trimmed lawns. Imani didn't flinch. Her fingers stayed relaxed around the small package in her hand, the one bearing a bright white label addressed clearly to Imani Johnson. She'd picked it up from Stephanie's porch not 30 seconds ago. The porch itself was a portrait of suburbia, potted ferns on white stands, a rocking chair with a floral cushion, and a welcome mat that now felt ironic. Behind the screen door, Stephanie stood in her pale pink bathrobe, face flushed beneath layers of concealer, one hand gripping her phone, the other still raised midpoint. "I asked you a question," she snapped, stepping outside. "That's my package." "It's not," Imani said, calm as ever. "It's addressed to me. You can look." Stephanie didn't move. Her eyes darted from the package to the street, then back to Imani. "It was left on my porch. That makes it mine. You're trespassing." A few houses down, a man paused while coiling his garden hose. A woman across the street stopped sweeping pine needles off her driveway. No one said a word, but the shift in attention was undeniable. Stephanie noticed, too. She dropped the phone to her side, breathing hard through her nose. "I'm calling the police." Imani raised an eyebrow, then slowly reached into her back pocket and pulled out her own phone. She tapped the screen and lifted it slightly. Recording. Her voice stayed level. "You can go ahead, but you should know, this package is mine, and I have every right to retrieve it. It's been inside your home for over a day." Stephanie's mouth opened, then closed again. Her fingers tightened around her phone. "You stole it," she said, louder now, speaking more toward the street than to Imani. "You broke into my property and took my mail. You're threatening me." From across the hedge, someone muttered, "Good Lord." Imani didn't reply. She turned the package label so it faced Stephanie, holding it steady, letting the name and barcode speak louder than words. "I feel unsafe," Stephanie said, dialing. "I need police assistance. Now." Imani let her phone drop slightly, continuing to record audio. "Hello, yes?" Stephanie began, her voice shifting to a high-pitched blend of urgency and trembling distress. "I'm at 114 Sycamore Lane. There's a woman on my porch. She's black, maybe in her 30s. She's stealing a package. I told her to leave, but she won't. She's filming me. I don't know what she's planning." On the screen of Imani's phone, the seconds ticked by. She said nothing, just kept recording. The longer Stephanie spoke, the more exaggerated her tone became. A dramatic flinch, a feigned step backward, eyes flicking to see who was watching. The dispatcher's voice could be heard faintly, calm and structured, asking questions. Stephanie nodded to no one. "Yes, I'm alone. No, I didn't invite her. Yes, she's being aggressive. I feel very unsafe. Please send someone quickly." Then she hung up, breathing hard. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "I don't care what game you're playing." Imani stepped back just enough to reclaim the edge of the sidewalk. "There's no game," she said softly. "I'm just here for what's mine." Stephanie started to reply, but Imani continued. "My name is Imani Johnson. I'm a licensed private investigator. I was hired by several residents of this neighborhood to look into a pattern of missing deliveries. You, Stephanie Holloway, have been recorded on multiple occasions taking packages that don't belong to you, including this one." Stephanie's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. In the silence, the hum of an approaching vehicle could be heard. "I'd advise you to stay calm," Imani added. "This is already being documented." A flicker of panic passed over Stephanie's features as the distant sound grew louder. Sirens, unmistakable now, breaking the morning stillness like glass cracking underfoot. A siren wailed at the end of the street. Stephanie started backing up, her face pale. Stephanie took a deep breath and stepped toward the officers, ready to perform, unaware she was the main exhibit. The two patrol cars came to a stop just outside the white picket fence, the engine hum fading into the heavy summer air. Heat shimmered off the pavement as the afternoon sun bore down without mercy. A pair of black boots clicked onto the sidewalk, followed by the crunch of gravel under a second set. From across the street, neighbors leaned slightly out of doorways, behind trimmed hedges and half-lowered blinds. Cell phones were visible in a few hands, already recording. Stephanie straightened her robe and plastered a quivering smile onto her face. "Officers, thank goodness," she called out. "This woman is trespassing. She's been threatening me. I'm scared." The older of the two, a white woman in a short-sleeved tan uniform, gave her a neutral nod. Her partner, a younger black man with mirrored sunglasses, scanned the yard without expression. Imani stood a measured 6 feet from the porch, arms loosely at her sides, a package still in one hand, her phone in the other. She offered a small nod as they approached. "Ma'am," the older officer said to Stephanie, "let's start with you. You made the call?" "Yes," Stephanie said, her voice cracking just a touch. She was on my porch with a box. It was mine. I asked her to leave, and she refused. She said horrible things and started filming me." She paused for dramatic effect, lowering her voice. "I felt threatened." The male officer turned slightly. "And you, ma'am?" he asked Imani. "I'm a licensed private investigator," Imani said calmly. "I was hired by several residents of this neighborhood to investigate a series of package thefts. The package I retrieved from that porch is addressed to me. I have video evidence that the homeowner removed it from my doorstep yesterday." Stephanie let out a disbelieving laugh. "She's lying. That's ridiculous. Who hires a PI for missing mail?" "I have my license and client authorization on file," Imani replied. She held up her phone. "I also have footage of the package being moved from my property, as well as GPS tracking data that places it inside that house for the past 24 hours. The female officer stepped forward slightly. "Do you mind showing us?" Imani handed her the phone. A short video played, Stephanie picking up the package, looking around, and walking away with it tucked under one arm. The footage ended with her entering the garage. The second video was even clearer, the box being opened, the contents checked, and then being repacked and shoved out of sight. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You recorded this yourself?" "Yes, and with permission, I can retrieve additional footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera confirming delivery." Stephanie waved her arms. "This is insane. That's not even my label. It's a scam." The male officer stepped around her and walked up the porch stairs. He picked up the discarded box from earlier and examined the shipping label. "This says Imani Johnson, 112 Sycamore. That's not your address, ma'am." Stephanie's lips parted, but no sound came out. At that moment, a voice rang out from behind the officers. "I lost a package too, a letter for my granddaughter's graduation. Never showed up." All eyes turned. Mrs. Ellerby, one of the oldest residents on the block, stood in her slippers, clutching a glass of iced tea with trembling fingers. She looked directly at Stephanie. "I called the post office 3 times. They said it was delivered. I bet it walked itself over here, too." A few murmurs rippled through the gathering spectators. One man stepped back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at Stephanie. Another woman lowered her phone, but kept it recording. Stephanie's confidence cracked a little more. I don't know what this is," she stammered. "I'm being set up." The female officer handed Imani back her phone and turned to her partner. They exchanged a glance, brief but significant. "Let's check the garage," the officer said quietly. One of them moved toward the side of the house. Stephanie's mouth opened in protest, but no words came. She stepped back onto the porch, face pale, grip tightening on her phone. Her eyes flicked between the crowd, the officers, and Imani, searching for a way out, but finding only closing walls. Stephanie stepped back, clutching the phone in her hand, her eyes panicked. Imani simply said, "I'll wait on the porch." The garage door creaked open like a secret too tired to stay hidden. The late afternoon sun slanted across the driveway, casting long shadows over the quiet crowd that had gathered at a polite but curious distance. The air was thick with anticipation, sticky with heat, and silent except for the hum of cicadas and the occasional creak of someone shifting on their heels. The officer nearest to the garage stepped inside first, flashlight already in hand, despite the daylight. Stephanie stood a few feet back, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression tight, jaw trembling, not with fear, but with fury she could no longer control. She'd said nothing since the officers asked for her permission to open the door. And when they clarified they didn't actually need it, she'd stepped aside without a word, her silence louder than anything she could have shouted. Inside, the beam of the flashlight danced over the cluttered space. Boxes. Dozens of them. Some torn open, others still sealed. Names and labels from across the neighborhood. Abernathy, Henderson, Lewis, Mullins. A children's toy set still in its plastic wrapping. A stack of paperbacks, one bearing the library stamp of Chatham County. A blender unopened, an envelope that looked like a birthday card, half hidden under a box of protein powder. The younger officer let out a low whistle and began snapping photographs. His partner stood just inside the threshold, making a mental count as she dictated into her recorder. Package 1, addressed to Eliza Henderson. Delivery confirmed May 12th. Package 2, Michael Abernathy, dated May 16th. Stephanie looked away, her fingers tapped against her elbow rhythmically, a beat of denial. On the sidewalk, Imani stood quietly, jotting notes in a small leather-bound book. She didn't smile. There was no triumph in her face, just precision and completion. She had what she needed. Her eyes flicked once to the house, then to the sky where the light was beginning to soften, washing the scene in a gold that felt at odds with the gravity of the moment. Across the street, the HOA board's vice president, A tall man named Ron Withers approached the officers with his arms raised slightly, as if asking permission to speak. "I think," he began cautiously, "we'll need to issue a formal statement to the neighborhood." The officer didn't respond, still documenting. Stephanie turned on Ron with a voice sharp and brittle. "You can't seriously think this is a matter for the HOA. This is harassment. It's a setup." Ron looked at her, then at the garage, then back. "You told us the cameras covered every angle," he said evenly. "You insisted on the fines for unsecured mailboxes. You wrote half our policy manual." "I was protecting the community." "Well," Ron said, his voice low, "seems you forgot to protect us from yourself." From behind them, Mr. Greeley cleared his throat. He leaned against the fence, arms folded, not bothering to hide the weariness in his voice. 3 years ago, he said to no one in particular, Stephanie led a vote to force me off the board. Said I was too old to understand tech, said my resistance to expanding the camera system was a liability. His eyes didn't leave the open garage. She promised she'd make us safer. Stephanie whirled on him. "You don't know anything about what I've done for this place." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Neither did anyone else. The older officer approached Stephanie with a sheet of paper in her hand and a steady, unflinching gaze. "Ma'am," she said, "based on the evidence recovered and the statements we've gathered, you're being served with a summons for theft of mail and harassment under Georgia state law. You'll need to appear in court on the date listed." Stephanie took the paper with a hand that trembled, her fingers tightening around it as if she could will the ink to blur. From behind the hedges, the murmurs had turned to pointed whispers. Someone mentioned starting a petition. Another suggested an emergency vote. Ron sighed and looked around at the others. "We'll have to convene the board by end of week," he said. "I'll draft a letter tonight." Stephanie said nothing. Her gaze drifted past them all, landing somewhere far away, where none of this was happening, where her porch was still hers, her rules still unchallenged, her HOA kingdom still intact. Then the second patrol car's lights blinked on. Red and blue swirled gently across her porch, casting harsh shadows on her face. She stepped down, almost as if on cue, and sat on the top step of her porch, staring into the sidewalk. Stephanie sat on the steps, red and blue lights flashing across her pale face. By late July, Rich Grove's lawns were green again, and the residents finally spoke freely over pulled pork and sweet tea. The backyard behind the community hall smelled of slow-cooked pork, charcoal, and warm summer grass. A long, folding table stretched across the lawn, draped in red and white checkered cloth and sagging slightly under the weight of casserole dishes, iced tea pitchers, bowls of coleslaw, and pies that shimmered under their plastic wrap domes. Fold-out chairs dotted the shaded perimeter, and fans whirred gently where the oldest residents sat beneath wide-brimmed hats and sunglasses. Children ran barefoot near the fence, their laughter light and unguarded. It was the first gathering since Stephanie's removal, and it felt different, not just because she was gone, but because people were talking again, laughing without looking over their shoulders, sharing stories that had sat silent too long. Mr. Greeley adjusted the mic stand at the edge of the patio and cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, glancing over the tops of his glasses. "But I suppose that's how I ended up back here in the first place." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "Today," he continued, "we're not here to talk about what went wrong. We're here to make sure it doesn't happen again." Murmurs of agreement followed. Someone tapped a paper plate against their thigh. Ice clinked in glasses. "For too long," he went on, "our HOA became a shield for the few instead of a platform for the many. It's our job now to rebuild it, not with louder rules, but with better listening." A round of soft applause rose from the folding chairs. Someone shouted, "Here! Here!" from the grill. We've already passed a new measure, Greeley added. 2-year term limits, rotating oversight on all surveillance access, no more single points of control. More clapping, this time stronger. A woman near the peach cobbler table nodded, pleased. A teenager took a sip of sweet tea and asked her dad what a term limit was. Off to the side, near the trellis blooming with late summer jasmine, Imani stood with a small paper plate in her hand and a smile that didn't ask for attention. She hadn't planned on staying this long. She rarely did, but something about this place had settled differently in her chest. People came by in 2s and 3s. Some just nodded. Others squeezed her hand. One woman, hair white and eyes sharp, handed her a jar sealed with gingham cloth. "Homemade peach preserves," she said. "Made it myself. First batch I've kept since, well, let's just say I stopped trusting the mail." Imani took it gently. "Thank you." "You brought something back," the woman said quietly. "Not just the mail." Imani didn't respond. She didn't have to. As the sun dipped behind the roofline of the hall, a new chairperson was introduced. Not from the old guard, not loud or flashy. Just a retired school principal with calm eyes and no clipboard. People clapped, but there were no cheers. Just a warm, satisfied hum, like a quilt being folded properly after a long night. Imani found Mr. Greeley near the dessert table, slicing a pie with deliberate care. "You're really leaving?" he asked without looking up. "I was never staying," she replied. He smiled. "Good job." "You too," she said. There were no grand farewells, no bouquets, no speeches. When someone tried to offer her a bouquet of plastic-wrapped supermarket flowers, she politely declined. "I didn't come for thanks," she said, "just to make things right." And then she was gone, walking slowly past the community bulletin board, where a new sign had gone up. Camera Access Committee meeting. All residents welcome. She reached her car just as the cicadas began their evening chorus. The streets of Rich Grove were quiet, warm, and somehow lighter. Inside the car, she opened her notebook, flipped past pages of names and notes, and wrote a single line at the bottom of the next clean page. Whispering Pines, HOA. Next job. By the time the last jar of sweet tea was emptied and the folding chairs were stacked away, Rich Grove felt like itself again. The silence that once covered fear had been replaced by voices, honest, imperfect, and finally heard. It took courage to speak and greater courage to listen, but when neighbors chose truth over comfort, the roots of their community grew stronger. Justice doesn't always wear a badge or raise its voice. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a breeze through an open field. And in a world of fences and porch lights, maybe all it takes to start over is a name on a box, and someone who dares to ask where it went.